His hand was already raised, fingers curled into a fist, trembling with rage. The designer-clad executive towered over the woman in black. His face twisted with the kind of entitled fury that came from a man who had never been told no. Shoppers froze mid-step. Luxury bags hung forgotten in manicured hands. The gleaming marble halls of Seoul's Lotte Plaza held its breath. But the blow never landed. A hand, calm and immovable as steel, caught Marcus Reed's wrist mid-swing. The grip was gentle, almost polite, but the message was unmistakable. The stranger who had intercepted the attack didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded a silence so absolute that the crystal chandeliers seemed to dim in reverence. Marcus turned to face his obstacle and found himself staring into eyes that held no mercy. Eyes like black ice. Eyes that belonged to Park Joon-seo, the Dragon of Seoul. And what happened next would destroy one man's empire while crowning a queen he'd thrown away. Stay with me until the end because this story will leave you speechless. But before we dive in, hit that like button, subscribe to Mafia Moonlight Tales, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single second of this. Now let's get into it. It's a crisp Saturday afternoon in downtown Seoul, present day. The Lotte Plaza World Tower gleams like a vertical city of glass and ambition, its marble corridors echoing with the soft click of Louboutins and the whispered negotiations of Korea's elite. This isn't just a shopping mall. This is a cathedral of wealth, where every boutique window displays dreams priced in millions of won, and every shopper understands the unspoken hierarchy. You dress to impress. You carry yourself with quiet confidence. And you never, ever make a scene. Marcus Reed stood near the entrance to a Chanel boutique, a monument to American arrogance wrapped in a Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 38, he'd climbed the corporate ladder of his Seoul-based tech firm through a combination of ruthless ambition and carefully cultivated connections. His salt and pepper beard was trimmed to perfection. His Italian leather shoes caught the light with every step. He was the kind of man who believed his bank account was a measure of his worth as a human being. And today, like every day since the divorce was finalized, he was nursing a wounded ego that demanded blood. The afternoon traffic of luxury shoppers flowed around him like water around a stone, chaebol wives with their entourages, Chinese tourists with shopping bags from every designer on the floor, young tech entrepreneurs pretending they belonged in spaces their startups hadn't yet earned them access to. Marcus barely noticed any of them. His attention was laser-focused on one woman, Danielle Lauron. His ex-wife stood 30 feet away, speaking quietly on her phone, her elegant black dress a study in understated sophistication. Her natural curls framed a face that Marcus had once claimed to love before he'd spent 5 years systematically destroying her confidence. To him, she looked exactly as she had the day he'd thrown her out of their penthouse with nothing but a suitcase and a sneer. Beautiful, broken, and supposedly beneath him. What Marcus couldn't see, what his arrogance wouldn't allow him to see, was the leather portfolio tucked under her arm, embossed with the logo of one of Asia's most exclusive architectural firms. He didn't notice the deference in the boutique manager's eyes when Danielle had walked past. And he certainly didn't register the two men in dark suits who had been maintaining a respectful distance from her since she'd entered the mall. All Marcus saw was an opportunity. An opportunity to remind his nothing ex-wife exactly where she belonged. He moved with the confidence of a predator who'd never encountered anything larger than himself. His expensive loafers squeaking against the polished marble as he closed the distance. Danielle's back was turned. She was laughing at something the person on the phone had said, a sound that ignited something ugly in Marcus's chest. How dare she be happy? How dare she exist in his world, in his city, in spaces he'd convinced himself only he deserved? Well, well, he announced loudly enough for nearby shoppers to turn. If it isn't my broke ex-wife, window shopping at stores she could never afford. Danielle's laughter died. Her shoulders tensed. For just a moment, she was transported back to their marriage, to late nights when his verbal assaults would pin her against kitchen counters, to mornings when he'd accidentally knock her design portfolios into the trash, to the final day when he told her she was nothing without his money and would never survive on her own. But this wasn't their kitchen. And Danielle Laurent was no longer the woman who'd flinched at his shadow. She ended her call with a quiet word and turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "Marcus, I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" He laughed, loud and performative, playing to the growing audience. "You are trouble. What are you even doing here? Did they not kick you out yet for shoplifting? Or are you here to beg me to take you back?" He reached for her arm, his fingers digging into her wrist with a grip meant to hurt, meant to remind her of every time he'd physically steered her away from conversations, from friends, from anything that made her feel human. "Let go," Danielle said, her voice steady despite the fear flickering in her eyes. "Or what?" Marcus pulled her closer, his other hand rising. "You'll call security. Please. I have friends in this building. You have nothing. You are nothing. And maybe it's time someone reminded you." The slap was already in motion when time seemed to stop. A hand appeared from nowhere, or perhaps everywhere, catching Marcus's raised wrist with the precision of a master surgeon and the finality of a closing vault. The grip wasn't brutal. There was no crushing of bones, no theatrical display of strength, just an absolute, unquestionable immobility that communicated a single truth. "You will go no further." Marcus's head whipped around, his face flushed with indignation that was rapidly curdling into something that looked dangerously close to fear. The man holding his wrist stood a head taller than Marcus, though his power had nothing to do with physical stature. Park Joon-seo, 45 years old, dressed in a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it could have been painted on, regarded Marcus with the kind of calm that preceded typhoons. His face was all sharp angles and controlled intensity, a face that negotiated billion-dollar deals over lunch and dispensed justice in basement rooms with equal composure. This was no ordinary businessman, though that's what his legitimate holdings would suggest to anyone who didn't know better. This was the man they called the Dragon of Seoul, the invisible emperor of an empire built on loyalty, precision, and an ironclad code that had one unbreakable rule. A man who raises his hand to a woman has already proven himself unworthy of power. And Marcus Reed, in his ignorance and arrogance, had just broken that rule in front of the one man in Seoul who would never let it slide. "I believe," Park Joon-seo said in perfect, unaccented English, his voice so quiet that nearby shoppers had to strain to hear, "the lady asked you to let go." The marble halls of Lotte Plaza had seen many things. Corporate deals sealed over coffee, marriage proposals beneath the crystal chandeliers, the quiet exchange of power between old money and new. But what unfolded next would become the stuff of legend, whispered about in boardrooms and exclusive clubs for years to come. The day Marcus Reed learned that his ex-wife wasn't broke, she was untouchable, and the man who'd made her so was the last person in Seoul anyone wanted as an enemy. The grip on Marcus's wrist remained steady, but in that frozen moment, Danielle's mind betrayed her. It dragged her back 5 years, to another moment when Marcus's hand had been raised, and no one had been there to stop it. They'd met at a tech conference in San Francisco. Marcus had been charming then, all tailored confidence and practiced smiles. He'd complimented her presentation on sustainable urban architecture, bought her coffee, listened with what seemed like genuine interest as she talked about her dreams of designing buildings that could change skylines. He'd made her feel seen, valued, important. The proposal came 6 months later, in a restaurant where the champagne cost more than her monthly rent. She'd said yes because she was young and brilliant and naively believed that love meant someone wanting to take care of you. She hadn't realized taking care of would mean taking over. Started small. Suggestions that became criticisms. "Are you really wearing that to my company dinner? Maybe you should let me handle the finances. You're so bad with numbers, honey. Why do you need to work so hard? I make enough for both of us." Each comment was a thread pulled from the fabric of who she was. Within a year of marriage, Her design portfolio sat gathering dust in a closet Marcus had relegated to her clutter. Her friends stopped calling after he'd made them feel unwelcome one too many times. Her office became a guest room because it's not like you're using it for anything important. The verbal assaults came next, delivered with the precision of a man who'd learned exactly where to cut to make it hurt without leaving visible scars. No firm is going to hire you. You've been out of the industry too long. Your designs are derivative. Everyone in Seoul does that minimalist nonsense. You should be grateful I married you. Without me, you'd be nobody. He controlled every credit card, every bank account, every receipt. When she tried to take a freelance architecture project, something small, just to feel like herself again, he'd called the client personally and told them she was unstable and going through some things. The project disappeared. So did the last ember of her professional confidence. The night she asked for a divorce, Marcus had laughed in her face. Then he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises and told her exactly what would happen if she left. He had connections, lawyers, friends in every major firm in Seoul. He would make sure she never worked as an architect again. He would tell everyone she was crazy, a gold digger, a failure. You'll have nothing, he'd hissed, his grip tightening. You'll be nothing. Because that's what you were before me. And that's what you'll be after. She'd left anyway. Walked out of their penthouse with one suitcase, her architecture degree, and a determination that felt like broken glass in her chest. Sharp and painful but capable of cutting through anything if she was brave enough to wield it. For 2 years, she'd rebuilt herself in silence. Took drafting jobs under a pseudonym. Worked midnight shifts at design firms that didn't ask questions. Slowly, painfully, she'd reconstructed the woman Marcus had tried to erase. But standing in Lotte Plaza with his hand on her wrist again, Danielle felt the old fear creeping back. The voice in her head that sounded like him, telling her she was nothing, she was nobody, she would never escape his shadow. Until a stranger's hand had caught Marcus's wrist. And everything changed. Park Joon-seo had learned about power from watching his father wield it incorrectly. He'd been 8 years old the first time he saw his mother's split lip, the careful way she turned her face from the light during breakfast. His father, a mid-level enforcer in the Busan syndicate, had come home drunk and angry about a deal gone wrong. When Joon-seo's mother had asked him to lower his voice so as not to wake the children, his father had shown her exactly what he thought of her concern. The next morning, his father sat at the head of the table like nothing had happened. He barked orders at his wife. He lectured young Joon-seo about respect and strength and what it meant to be a man in their world. But Joon-seo had watched his mother move through the kitchen with quiet dignity. Her swollen jaw a testament to his father's weakness, not his strength. And in that moment, a philosophy was born that would shape the next 4 decades of his life. A man who hits a woman is a man who cannot lead. His father proved it 6 months later when a rival faction eliminated him in a restaurant bathroom, not because he was feared, but because he was sloppy, emotional, and ultimately expendable. Men who ruled by impulse, by rage, by the need to dominate the powerless, never lasted long. They confused fear with loyalty. They mistook violence for control. Joon-seo had vowed to be different. He'd built his empire with surgical precision, starting with legitimate businesses in real estate and construction before expanding into the gray territories that existed between law and power. By 30, he controlled enough of Seoul's infrastructure that politicians came to him for favors. By 40, his network stretched across 3 continents. But it wasn't the money or the reach that made Park Joon-seo untouchable. It was his code. He never dealt in drugs or human trafficking, industries built on destroying the vulnerable. He paid his people well and on time, earning loyalty that couldn't be bought with fear. He kept his word even when it cost him, because a man whose promises meant nothing had no foundation to build upon. And above all, he had one unbreakable rule that every man in his organization learned on day one. Any act of violence against women, children, or the defenseless was grounds for immediate and permanent removal. Not firing. Removal. His lieutenants thought he was sentimental. His rivals thought it was a weakness they could exploit. They were both wrong. It was the coldest calculation of all. Organizations built on protecting the powerless earned the loyalty of entire communities. Mothers who knew their children were safe. Wives who knew their husbands would face consequences for raising a hand. Daughters who grew up understanding that power should shelter, not destroy. That loyalty became an intelligence network more valuable than any surveillance system. An early warning system that kept Joon-seo 3 steps ahead of every rival who'd ever tried to move against him. So when he'd entered Lotte Plaza that afternoon for a routine meeting with Danielle Laurent, his lead architect and the genius behind his upcoming Gangnam skyscraper project, he'd spotted the confrontation immediately. He'd recognized the body language of a man about to strike. He'd seen Danielle's face drain of color in a way that spoke of old trauma, old fear. And he'd moved. Not because Danielle worked for him, though that would have been reason enough. Not because the crowd was watching, though public embarrassment had its uses. He'd intervened because 37 years ago, a boy had watched his mother suffer in silence and vowed that no woman would ever suffer that way in his presence again. Marcus Reed's raised hand was already falling when Joon-seo caught it. And in that moment Marcus's fate was sealed. Marcus's face cycled through confusion, indignation, and finally a sneer of recognition as he looked from his captured wrist to the man holding it. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm an executive at Marcus Reed, Vice President of Operations at Technova Solutions. Annual salary of 280 million won, plus stock options you've been inflating through creative accounting." Joon-seo's voice remained conversational, almost pleasant. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Reed. The question is, do you know who I am?" The crowd had grown larger now, luxury shoppers forming a loose circle around the confrontation like spectators at a gladiator match. Smartphones emerged from designer handbags. This was the kind of drama that would dominate Seoul's social media by sunset. "I don't care who you are," Marcus blustered, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "This is between me and my ex-wife. She's probably here to steal something or beg for money. She has nothing. She is nothing. Nothing." Joon-seo repeated the word as though tasting it, finding it distasteful. He released Marcus's wrist with deliberate care, then turned to Danielle. When he spoke to her, his entire demeanor shifted, the cold authority replaced by genuine respect. "Ms. Laurent, are you harmed?" Danielle shook her head, still processing the surreal nature of her employer intervening in her personal nightmare. "I'm fine, Mr. Park. I apologize for the disruption. I didn't expect to run into." "You have nothing to apologize for." Joon-seo's gaze swung back to Marcus, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Reed, allow me to educate you about nothing." He gestured to Danielle with something approaching reverence. "This woman designed the Park Tower Gangnam, 93 floors, mixed-use luxury development, estimated completion value of 1.7 trillion won. It will be the crown jewel of Seoul's skyline." Marcus's smirk faltered. That's being designed by Park Architectural Group, the most exclusive firm in which I own," Joon-seo interjected smoothly. "And Ms. Laurent is not just employed by my firm. She is my firm's vision. Every curve of glass, every structural innovation, every detail that will make that building legendary. It all came from her mind, her talent, her genius." The blood drained from Marcus's face as the implications crashed over him like a wave. The woman he'd dismissed as destitute was the architect behind one of Asia's most anticipated developments. The woman he'd tried to humiliate in public was under the protection of Park Joon-seo, a man whose name appeared in Forbes and police files with equal frequency. "I've seen your building, Mr. Reed," Joon-seo continued, his tone shifting to something that resembled sympathy but felt like a blade. "Technova's headquarters. Adequate construction. Uninspired design. The kind of structure that will be forgotten the moment something better rises beside it." He paused, letting the comparison hang in the air. Ms. Laurent creates legacies. You occupy office space. Perhaps you should reconsider your definition of nothing. Around them the crowd murmured. Phones recorded. The story was already spreading like wildfire through Seoul's interconnected elite. And Marcus Reed, for perhaps the first time in his entitled life, understood what it meant to be powerless. Marcus left Lotte Plaza with his pride in tatters and his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The video of his humiliation had already racked up 40,000 views on Korean social media. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues asking if that was really him getting dressed down by Park Joon-seo in a luxury mall. But Marcus Reed hadn't clawed his way to vice president by accepting defeat gracefully. By Monday morning, he'd convinced himself that the entire encounter was a misunderstanding, or better yet, a lie. Danielle couldn't possibly be that important. Park Joon-seo was probably just sleeping with her, and when he got bored, she'd be back to being nobody. All Marcus needed to do was accelerate that process. He spent Sunday evening crafting the perfect character assassination. He called it expressing legitimate concerns about professional conduct. He documented every perceived flaw from their marriage, reframed as professional inadequacies. Her emotional instability, her inability to handle pressure, her history of abandoning projects. All lies, but Marcus had learned long ago that the truth mattered less than who told the story most convincingly. Monday at 9 a.m., he placed a call to Park Architectural Group. When the receptionist answered, Marcus deployed his most authoritative corporate voice. "This is Marcus Reed, Vice President at Technova Solutions. I need to speak with whoever manages Danielle Laurent. It's regarding her professional conduct and some serious concerns that have come to my attention." There was a pause. "One moment please, Mr. Reed." Marcus smiled. This was easy. He'd lodge his complaint, plant seeds of doubt, and watch Danielle's house of cards collapse. Even Park Joon-seo would have to listen to documented concerns from a corporate executive. The line clicked. A new voice came through, deep, measured, with an edge that suggested patience worn thin. "This is Kong Min-jae, Director of Operations for Park Enterprises. You have concerns about Ms. Laurent." "Yes, thank you for taking my call," Marcus began, launching into his prepared speech. "I feel obligated to inform you that Ms. Laurent has a history of instability. During our marriage, she frequently abandoned projects, showed poor judgment, and demonstrated an inability to handle professional pressure. I would hate to see your firm's reputation damaged by your marriage," Kong Min-jae interrupted, his tone flattering. "You were married to Ms. Laurent for 5 years. I know her better than anyone, which is why I felt it was my duty to. And you divorced her approximately 2 years ago, at which point you retained all marital assets and left her with nothing. Is that correct?" Marcus hesitated. How did this man know that? "The terms of our divorce are private, but—" "And this call," Kong continued, his voice hardening, "comes 48 hours after you attempted to physically assault Ms. Laurent in Lotte Plaza, an act that was interrupted by Mr. Park himself. An act that was witnessed by approximately 200 people and recorded by at least 30 smartphones. The office suddenly felt too small, too warm. "Mr. Reed, I want to be very clear about something. I don't work for Park Architectural Group. I work for Park Joon-seo directly. And you just called the personal number of the man responsible for ensuring that anyone who threatens Mr. Park's interests is dealt with swiftly and permanently." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, his hand trembling, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. Danielle sat across from Park Joon-seo in his private office Tuesday afternoon. Her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. The view from the 68th floor stretched across Seoul like a kingdom waiting to be claimed, but she couldn't stop staring at the architectural renderings spread across his desk. Her renderings, her vision made manifest in steel and glass. "You're afraid," Joon-seo observed. "Not a question. A statement delivered with the clinical precision of a surgeon identifying an infection. I'm grateful for your intervention, Mr. Park, but I don't want to cause problems for your organization." Marcus is irrelevant. Just leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark, calculating eyes. Yet you speak of him as though he still holds power over you. Why? Danielle's fingers tightened around the teacup. He has connections. He could spread rumors, damage my reputation. He's done it before. And you believe reputation is the source of power? Isn't it? Joon-seo stood and moved to the architectural model of Park Tower Gangnam, a miniature masterpiece that occupied an entire corner of his office. He ran his hand along the scaled facade, tracing the innovative cantilever design that Danielle had spent 8 months perfecting. When I was building my first legitimate business, a rival tried to destroy me. He had political connections, media contacts, and a very loud voice. He told everyone who would listen that I was a thug, a criminal, unworthy of operating in legitimate circles. Joon-seo's finger stopped at the tower's crown, an asymmetric peak that had become the project's signature feature. Do you know what I did? You fought back. I built something undeniable. He turned to face her. Power doesn't come from shouting the loudest, Ms. Laurent. Comes from creating something so valuable, so essential, that the world reorganizes itself around you. Your ex-husband has a voice. You have vision. Which do you think will matter in 10 years? Danielle finally looked up, meeting his gaze. He made me believe I was nothing. Because your existence threatened his fragile ego. Men like Marcus Reed need others to be small so they can feel large. But you're not small anymore, are you? Joon-seo returned to his desk, pulling up a tablet that showed financial projections. This tower will generate revenue for 40 years. It will house families, businesses, dreams. Thousands of people will live their lives inside something you imagined. That is power, Ms. Laurent. The kind that can't be shouted down or legislated away or destroyed by bitter men with loud opinions. He slid a document across the desk, a contract amendment with numbers that made Danielle's breath catch. Lead architect bonus upon project completion, plus percentage points of the building's operational revenue in perpetuity. Your name on the cornerstone. Your legacy in steel. Joon-seo's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Stop fighting Marcus Reed's war. He operates in the arena of noise and ego. You operate in the arena of creation. There is no competition. For the first time since Saturday, Danielle felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. The email arrived Thursday morning with a subject line that made Marcus's chest swell with vindication. Executive meeting. Your presence required. Confidential opportunity. Finally, he thought. Recognition. Probably that regional director position he'd been angling for. Technova CEO had been impressed with his Q3 numbers, and Marcus had spent months positioning himself as indispensable. The timing was perfect, right when he needed a win to erase the lingering embarrassment of that mall incident. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at a building Marcus didn't recognize. Some sleek glass tower in Gangnam with lobby security that checked his ID twice. He took it as a sign of importance. Discreet locations meant sensitive discussions. Promotions. Acquisitions. The kind of opportunities that separated executives from ordinary employees. He rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, rehearsing his acceptance speech. Humble but confident. Gracious but deserving. The receptionist led him down a hallway lined with architectural awards and magazine covers featuring buildings he vaguely recognized. The conference room at the end had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul, a table made of black marble, and absolutely no one inside except. Marcus froze in the doorway. Danielle sat at the head of the table, not cowering in a corner, not taking notes as someone's assistant. She sat in the power position, a leather portfolio open in front of her, wearing a slate gray suit that probably cost more than his car payment. Her natural curls were styled with casual elegance. Her expression was calm, professional, and completely devoid of the fear he'd seen in her eyes at Latte Plaza. Mr. Reed, she said, her voice steady. Please sit down. What the hell is this? Marcus remained in the doorway, his brain struggling to reconcile the woman before him with the broken ex-wife who lived in his memory. I was supposed to meet. You were supposed to meet with representatives from Technova's primary investor group. I'm afraid there's been a change in agenda. Danielle gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. Please. Marcus's phone buzzed. An email from Technova's CEO. Cooperate fully with Ms. Laurent. Your employment status depends on it. His legs moved automatically, carrying him to the chair though every instinct screamed at him to run. As he sat, he noticed the documents spread across Danielle's side of the table. Financial reports, audit findings, screenshots of emails he'd sent, including Monday's call to Kong Min-jae. I'm sure you're confused, Danielle began, her fingers steepled in front of her in a gesture that reminded him uncomfortably of Park Joon-seo. Let me clarify your situation. Technova Solutions occupies 3 floors in the Meridian Business Complex. That building is owned by Meridian Real Estate Holdings, which is a subsidiary of Park Enterprises. Your CEO answers to investors, 40% of whom are connected to companies in Mr. Park's portfolio. The room tilted slightly. Marcus gripped the edge of the table. You tried to get me fired, Marcus. You called Mr. Park's director of operations and accused me of professional misconduct. You attempted to weaponize my past against my future. Danielle's eyes held no malice, only a cold professional assessment. Now we're going to discuss what happens next. The door behind Marcus opened without warning. Park Joon-seo entered with 2 men in dark suits, one carrying a laptop, the other a slim leather folder that looked expensive and ominous in equal measure. Mr. Reed. Joon-seo took the seat beside Danielle, his presence immediately dominating the room. Thank you for joining us. I believe Ms. Laurent has provided context. Marcus's throat felt like sandpaper. I don't understand what. Then allow me to educate you. Joon-seo nodded to the man with the laptop. A projection screen descended from the ceiling, illuminating with spreadsheets that made Marcus's stomach drop. For the past 18 months, you've been inflating your division's performance metrics by approximately 30%. Fake contracts with shell companies, phantom clients, revenue that exists only on paper. That's not, Marcus's voice cracked. Those are legitimate business partnerships. Bright Path Consulting, registered in Delaware. No employees, no office. No business activity beyond receiving wire transfers from Technova that you personally approved. The screen changed. Nexus Solutions Group. Same story. Shall I continue? The air felt too thin. Marcus looked at Danielle, searching for any sign of the woman he'd controlled, the woman who would back down if he just shouted loud enough. She stared back with the detached interest of someone observing a lab specimen. You've embezzled approximately 400 million won over 18 months, Joon-seo continued, his tone suggesting he was discussing the weather. You used those funds to maintain a lifestyle your actual salary couldn't support. The watch you're wearing right now, purchased with diverted company funds. The lease on your Gangnam apartment, paid through one of your shell companies. Marcus felt his carefully constructed world crumbling. If you report this, I'll expose your operation. Everyone knows who you really are. I'll go to the media, the police. Joon-seo smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Marcus had ever seen. Please do. I would love to watch you explain to prosecutors how you discovered financial irregularities at your company while simultaneously being investigated for embezzlement and assault. I'm sure they'll find your testimony very credible. The man with the leather folder placed it in front of Marcus. Inside were 2 documents. Option 1, Joon-seo explained, tapping the first document. Full confession. Immediate resignation. You repay what you stole through a payment plan that will take approximately 20 years. You leave Seoul, you leave this industry, and you never speak to or about Ms. Laurent again. In exchange, I ensure the criminal charges remain quiet. And option 2. I give this evidence to prosecutors, the media, and every company in your professional network. You face criminal charges, public humiliation, and prison time. Your choice, Mr. Reed. But you have 30 seconds to decide. Marcus's hands shook as he reached for the pen. The fitted Tom Ford suit suddenly felt like a costume he'd been caught wearing. Without the illusion of success, without the armor of money and position, he was exactly what he'd always feared being. Nothing. 3 days after signing the confession, Marcus waited in the parking garage beneath Danielle's apartment building. He'd learned her schedule the way he used to during their marriage. Obsessive attention disguised as care. She finished at the Park architectural offices by 7 most evenings, arrived home by 8. He told himself he just wanted to talk, to explain, to make her understand that he'd never meant for things to go this far. But the rage simmering beneath his rationalizations told a different story. Danielle's car pulled into her assigned spot at 8:07 p.m. She emerged carrying her leather portfolio, checking her phone, unaware that her past was waiting between concrete pillars and fluorescent lights. Danielle. She spun toward his voice and Marcus saw it, that flash of fear, there and gone in a heartbeat. It fed something ugly in him, something that had been starving since Joon-seo had dismantled his life. Marcus, you're violating your restraining order. He stepped closer, hands raised in mock surrender. I know. I don't care anymore. You destroyed everything. My job, my reputation, my life. All because you couldn't accept that you were nothing without me. Danielle's grip tightened on her portfolio, but she didn't back away. I didn't destroy your life, Marcus. You did. The embezzlement, the fraud, that was all you. I did what I had to do to maintain appearances. Do you know what it's like being married to someone so pathetic that people assume you're failing too? I had to prove I was successful despite you dragging me down. Despite me. Something shifted in Danielle's expression. Not fear now, but something harder. Colder. I put you through business school while working 2 jobs. I designed the pitch deck that got Technova their Series B funding. I was never your burden, Marcus. I was your foundation. And the moment you didn't need me anymore, you tried to destroy me so I wouldn't realize how little you'd contributed. You don't get to rewrite history. I don't need to. The history speaks for itself. Danielle took a step forward, closing the distance he'd created. You spent 5 years convincing me I was worthless. But here's what I finally understand. You weren't describing me. You were describing yourself. Every insult, every criticism, every moment you tried to make me feel small. You were just projecting your own inadequacy onto the one person who believed in you. Marcus's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. Old instinct, old pattern, old power. Danielle looked down at his grip, then back up at his face, and smiled. Let go, Marcus. Or what? You'll call your Mafia boyfriend. No. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. I'll break your wrist myself. I've been taking Krav Maga for 18 months. And unlike you, I don't need anyone to fight my battles. She twisted her arm in a motion her instructor had taught her, breaking his grip with surgical efficiency. Marcus stumbled backward, shocked. Goodbye, Marcus, Danielle said, walking past him toward the elevator. Don't come back. She didn't look back once. The Park Tower Gangnam rose into the Seoul skyline like a blade of light, its asymmetric crown catching the sunset in a way that made it appear to be carved from amber and fire. 18 months of construction, 3 years of planning, and countless nights of Danielle's vision made manifest in steel, glass, and impossible engineering. Tonight was the unveiling. Black sedans lined the circular drive, disgorging celebrities, politicians, and the kind of wealth that moved markets with phone calls. The lobby blazed with champagne and string quartets, with ice sculptures and speeches from dignitaries who praised the building's innovation while carefully avoiding mention of who really owned it. Danielle stood near the center of it all, wearing a midnight blue gown that made her look like she'd been sculpted from the same elegant materials as her building. Reporters asked for photos. Architectural journals requested interviews. The mayor himself had shaken her hand and called her the future of Korean design. Park Joon-seo watched from his position near the main atrium, a glass of whiskey in hand, looking every bit the legitimate real estate mogul the media believed him to be. When Danielle's eyes found his across the crowd, he raised his glass in silent acknowledgement. She'd earned this without his protection, without his interference. He'd simply ensured no one could take it from her. Outside, beyond the velvet ropes and private security, Marcus Reed stood on the sidewalk with the other curious onlookers. His apartment was gone, sold to cover his debts. His car was gone. The designer suits had been auctioned. He wore a department store blazer that fit poorly and shoes that pinched his feet. He'd told himself he wouldn't come, that watching her triumph would be torture. But he couldn't stay away. Through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched Danielle laugh at something a famous architect said, watched her gesture toward the tower's cantilever design, her hands moving with the confident grace of someone who knew her worth, watched Park Joon-seo approach her with 2 glasses of champagne, speaking quietly while she smiled. A real smile, the kind Marcus hadn't seen in years. A couple pushed past him to get a better view, not even registering his existence. A photographer asked him to move. He was blocking the shot. Security glanced his way, assessing whether he was a threat or just another nobody drawn to the spectacle of power and beauty. Marcus turned away before anyone could recognize him, before he had to watch anymore. The building soared above him, Danielle's name etched in elegant script on the cornerstone beside the date. A permanent monument to everything she'd built after he'd tried to break her. He walked into the Seoul night, shoulders hunched, just another shadow disappearing into the city she now owned. 2 weeks after the grand opening, Danielle stood in her new office on the 72nd floor of Park Tower Gangnam, a space she'd designed for herself with views that stretched from Namsan Tower to the Han River. Her name was on the door. Her vision surrounded her in every angle of glass and light. Park Joon-seo had requested a final walkthrough, and now they stood together in silence, watching the city pulse below them. "Do you know why I intervened that day?" Joon-seo asked finally. "In the mall." Danielle turned from the window. "Because I work for you. I intervened because I watched my father rule through violence for 20 years. He thought fear made him powerful. He thought raising his hand made him strong." Joon-seo's reflection in the glass looked carved from stone. He died powerless and unmourned because he never understood that true power isn't about domination. It's about restraint. About choosing not to destroy when you have the capacity to do so. "Marcus never learned that," Danielle said quietly. "Men like Marcus measure worth in bank accounts and job titles because those are the only metrics that make them feel superior. They need someone beneath them to feel elevated." Issa turned to face her directly. "But you know the truth now, don't you? Your worth was never determined by his opinion. It existed before him, survived him, and will outlast his memory." Danielle thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. Terrified, convinced she was nothing, unable to imagine a future beyond Marcus's shadow. She thought about the moment in the parking garage when she'd broken his grip and walked away. Not because someone saved her. Because she'd saved herself. "The hardest part wasn't proving him wrong," she admitted. "It was believing I deserved to be proven right." "That's the cycle," Joon-seo said. "Abuse doesn't end when you leave. It ends when you stop hearing the abuser's voice in your own head. When you stop measuring yourself by their broken standards." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 people who understood power from opposite sides of the same coin. Joon-seo had built his empire on the principle that strength without honor was just violence in expensive clothing. Danielle had rebuilt herself on the understanding that her value wasn't negotiable, regardless of who tried to diminish it. "What happens to Marcus now?" she asked. "He lives with the consequences of his choices. No more, no less." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The best revenge isn't destruction, Ms. Laurent. It's indifference. You don't need to think about Marcus Reed anymore. You've already won." After he left, Danielle returned to the window. Somewhere in the city below, Marcus was learning to survive without the armor of stolen money and manufactured superiority. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, no triumph in his suffering. She felt nothing. And that, she realized, was freedom. True power wasn't about making others small. It was about becoming too large to be diminished. Not through aggression or dominance, but through the quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own worth. Marcus had tried to teach her she was nothing. Instead, she'd learned she was everything.